This third video, I'm going to talk about adding variables to the script and also showing you how to access the dialog menu. First thing I always do when I create a script is I always add the option explicit at the very beginning. You add the option explicit before the submain. What the option explicit does is it forces you to define all the variables. This causes you to do a bit more work because you do have to go out and define the variables, but at the same time it can save you a lot of hassle because it gets rid of any problems for typos, such as typing using a variable with one name and then misspelling it. The script doesn't care whether you misspell it or not, so you wouldn't get any errors, but the variable wouldn't be used properly. Using the option explicit gets you away from all that problems. So the first thing I want to do after the option explicit is I want to add several variables that I'll use to capture the information from the menu. I'm going to put them as global variables. Global variables are defined outside of any of the functions, and the global variables can be accessed from any of the functions or subroutines within the script. I do this because these variables need to be accessible from different functions within the script, and it's just more of a way of convenience to do it this way. So the first variable I want to create is the file name. I usually add an S before strings, so when I'm looking at the variable name, I know that this is actually a string variable. It's just something that I've sort of got used to using. So the next variable I want is a variable that will hold the name of the field I select from the drop-down. Next, I want a variable to hold the contents of the amount field. You may remember within the dialog menu, we have an edit box in order for the user to input the number that they're looking for, be it like 10, 20, 100, whatever it may be. So this variable will hold that. I define it as a string, and I'll talk about why it's a string later on. And finally, I'm going to define a Boolean variable to hold the contents of whether or not we want to use a greater than equal to or less than or equal to. So I define it as a Boolean because there's only two of them. So I can say it's either true, false, 1, 2, or whatever you may want. If there had been more than two, I would have defined it as an integer. But since there's two, I can get away with defining it as a Boolean. Next thing, if I do run this, what it'll do is it's going to cause me an error. It's saying that the variable not defined db. What happens is when you extract anything from IDEA for the history, it gives you code that you can run, but it doesn't define any of the variables that are needed to run the code. So you have to go in and now add them. So I'm going to add in a variable to hold the database object. I'm going to define a variable to hold the task object, and I'm going to define a variable to hold the DB name. Also, at this point in time, I'm going to comment out the call direct extraction because I don't want the script to be running yet. Right now, I'm just creating the variables and making sure everybody's in place before running the script. So if I run it now, we'll see if we get any errors. We do. And what happens? Because I did a typo here, as we can see. Option explicit forces a typo. Now, this is a good learning opportunity. If I comment out the option explicit and hit the run script, it allows me to run it. Here, in this instance, we were defined an SB name, we got DB name, we got two different variables here, but we actually think it's the same one. Having the option explicit, and I go rerun it again, will show me that there is an error here. And that's because I mistyped this one. So now if I try it again, no problems, it works fine. I'm now going to create a function that will call the menu, and what this will do is it will display the dialog box in which you can enter in the different parameters. So I'm creating a function called menu, so now I'll just create that function. And from in there, I need a couple of variables to hold the information. The first one I'm going to do is create a variable called DLG as DLG menu. What this DLG sorry, DLG, not DGL. What this DLG variable does is it holds the dialog menu. So all the information within the dialog menu can be displayed through accessing the DLG variable. And we'll see later on that we'll need the DLG to be able to access all the contents that we've selected within the menu. Next thing I want to do is define an integer. Usually we call it button. So I define a variable called button. This will show you which button has been selected from the dialog menu. If we go into the dialog menu, we can see that we have the OK button and the cancel button. The OK button is defined as -1 and the cancel button is defined as 0. So these are predefined buttons. Next, we have the select file. This would be button number 1. How the IDEAScript keeps track of buttons is in the order that you add them to the dialog. So since I've added this first, that'd be button number 1. If I added on a second button, that'd be number 2, 3, 4, and so on. It doesn't matter what the location of the button is within the dialog. It's the order in which you add that button to the dialog that defines whether or not it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. So next, I'm going to add some code that will allow me to call up the dialog. So how I do that is there is a function within IDEAScript called dialog that will call up a variable that is associated with the dialog. So in this instance, I say dialog bracket DLG, which is the variable holding the DLG menu dialog, and I equate that to button. So that when I click on a button, what ends up happening is it'll return the button number to this variable, and then we can do something with it. So now if I click on run, it'll show me the dialog. And here, if I click on any of the buttons, like if I click on the select file, it will exit the dialog. And if I had added a message box to see what the button number is, and I select the file, it shows that it's button number 1. And that is how you create your basic variables within a script, and also how you call up the dialog. In the next video, I'm going to walk you through how to go in and access the select file. So have the file explorer pop up and you select the file. So I'll see you in the next video.